What do majestic giant orca whales in Puget Sound have in common with towering fir trees at the top of Pacific Northwest mountains? They are all nourished and nurtured by salmon. But this amazing keystone species has been hampered by human development for decades. Join me on this episode of Tales of the Sound, where we'll unlock the secrets of the salmon, as well as find out about ongoing local efforts to help this species flourish once again. Right now in the Pacific Northwest, the rain that we know and love is returning to the rivers and the streams and creeks that will of course feed into Puget Sound. Against those currents fight the salmon, the mighty warriors that are attempting to make their way back to the places where they began their life.
So we're at the Big Beef Creek Research Station today, here at the mouth of Big Beef Creek. This station is used to monitor specifically coho, and we have employees, biologists and technicians for the agency that actually count every single wild adult coho that comes back to the stream and every single wild juvenile salmon that leaves the stream.
In the magic of nature, salmon are born and make their way to the ocean, a so-called anadromous species that can transition from freshwater to saltwater. Most that survive eventually return to the same place they hatched, or close to it, and create the next generation of salmon. But they don't just breed a new kind of salmon. Just as we like to eat salmon, so do all kinds of animals like bears and eagles, osprey, but they also end up peeing and pooping out a special kind of nitrogen isotope, something that salmon got from the ocean. That actually goes into the soil, revitalizing mighty fir and cedar that we love here in the Pacific Northwest.
Salmon are probably the most important species here in the Pacific Northwest. You know, they're what's called a keystone species. Everything around here, depends on salmon, whether it's, the bald eagles or even the trees next to the bank. When salmon go out to the ocean, they're just these little juvenile fish. When they come back, they're 10, 15, 20 pounds, and that's all nutrients that have, come from the ocean and are coming back into the system. So they're kind of like a conveyor belt of nutrients for the terrestrial world. So that reason alone makes them so important, and the more of them we have up here, the better it is for everything.
When we look around a stream, we see all of these trees growing on the sides of streams and all these shrubs. And those trees and shrubs also are impacted by the nutrients that salmon bring into the system every year. So as those adults come in and lay their eggs, after that they die and they deposit their nutrients into the soil all around them. So those nutrients help feed the forests that are around us all.
In another corner of the ecosystem, salmon, particularly Chinook, provide the primary food source for southern resident orca whales that frequent the Salish Sea and Puget Sound waters. There are 5 main types of salmon. There are king or Chinook salmon, sockeye or red, coho or silver, pink or humpback, and finally chum or dog salmon.
In Kitsap County, we primarily have chum and coho that spawn in our streams. We also have some hatchery Chinook salmon, and we have lots of hatchery and wild Chinook salmon that use our shorelines.
Before settlers came to Puget Sound, the salmon runs were abundant, streams packed so full that you could almost grab them out of the water.
I've seen the old pictures, and they're just, for me, they're breathtaking because, they're all in black and white, of course, and you see these fish that are, 30, 40, 50 pounds, and, that was normal. That was how big all of these fish used to be. You literally could walk across their backs. When you see that, it just gives you these spine-tingling sensations like, wow, this is amazing. And that must have been a very special event. And in fact, a lot of the Salish tribes had salmon celebrations just acknowledging the return of these fish and what it meant to all of their families and the nourishment to the ecosystem here.
But in recent centuries, humans have burdened this incredible creature. Pacific salmon are facing a number of threats, including climate change, habitat destruction, and unsustainable fishing harvests.
So they became more of a commodity than a coveted resource, if you will. I can only imagine what it looked like back, when there weren't any houses here or any culverts to block their passage, or, huge commercial fleets out in the sound, intercepting them on the way in.
In Washington state, lawmakers and leaders, spurred by a court decision, have moved quickly to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to remove fish barriers for passage of salmon and other species. In nearby Jefferson County, for instance, a causeway that used to carry cars and block salmon from going to some pristine habitat has been taken out between Indian Island and Marrowstone Island. The $12 million plus project installed a bridge, and leaders there are hoping it will help those salmon to find that habitat in between the islands.
Historically, there was free-flowing water between Oak Bay and Kitsap Harbor. Residents on Marrowstone Island started trying to make it so that they could travel across in low tides, and they started slowly filling this channel. By the late 40s, they had gone so far as to actually build a road with undersized culverts that were only 6 feet in diameter. And that completely constricted the flow of tidal water into basically these two little tiny straws compared to having the open tidal channel.
Once the causeway was installed, that became a choke point, no more fish passage. It basically restricted the tidal flow of the harbor back to Puget Sound, Oak Bay behind us here. That created warmer water, which resulted in marine biotoxin blooms, algae blooms, which were detrimental to the fish and shellfish populations. 2 years after I started here in 1996, I witnessed a massive fish kill in the south end of Kitsap Harbor, where we saw many different types of finfish species washed up on the shoreline just by the tens of thousands. And that was a result of low oxygen, higher water temperatures, and that was one of the many detrimental effects of having a causeway instead of a tidal connection.
We're waiting with bated breath for the first juvenile salmon to come through. We are seeing cutthroat trout are traveling through. We've heard of people catching them here in the tidal channel. There's Dungeness crab that are finding their way through for the first time, and lots of forage fish. It's really exciting to see the rebound of the animals that we've restored this habitat for.
Meanwhile, an undersized culvert at Seebeck Holly Road Northwest, combined with an older fish ladder, has been causing problems for adult salmon to spawn, or even juveniles trying to get through. So the culvert's coming out, and in its place, a new bridge is going in at a cost of more than $2 million.
We decided that it would be important to install a bridge in the place of a very undersized and perched culvert. I think it's important to start with the adults that come and move up this stream into their spawning habitat. Those spawning salmon come in, they lay eggs in what's called a redd, and once those eggs hatch, those fish emerge from the gravel. And in this particular stream, we have a lot of coho salmon, and coho salmon will spend a couple of seasons sometimes in the stream, so that stream habitat is very important to them. So they hatch, they live for a couple of years, and then they out-migrate into Hood Canal. So, when we have things like undersized culverts or culverts that are perched, it means that those salmon don't have access to many parts of the stream. So during summertime, there are typically very low flows in the stream. Those juvenile salmon, which, they're only a few inches long, can't jump up into the culvert to access the upper parts of the stream. So if they end up swimming downstream below the culvert, they just can't access that habitat. That habitat's important to them because all the little bugs and macroinvertebrates that live within the stream are food for salmon. And so if they have a limited amount of stream miles that they have access to, they don't have access to all the food that is in the other section of the stream.
Here at Chico Creek, the most abundant salmon stream in all of Kitsap County, a $4.4 million project between Kitsap County and the Suquamish tribe has recently taken out a box culvert, rechanneled the creek, and added a 140-foot-long bridge at Golf Club Hill Road. The reason for that, of course, is fish passage.
This is Chico Creek. It has one of the largest salmon runs in East Kitsap County. And it's kind of a focal point for the Suquamish tribe because this is their native lands right here. This watershed is just extremely important. This bridge behind me right here was just a recent salmon project that a triple box culvert was removed. Had been there for 40, 50, 60 years, and it was a constriction in the salmon migration. And now we have a beautiful bridge here, and these fish can now come up through this section of the stream at any time with nothing to stop them, nothing to slow them down. These fish have about 6 to 10 days once they hit fresh water to get up into the stream and find a suitable spawning habitat. So their clock is ticking, so to speak. And they all come in cycles. You know, some years will be better than others. Sometimes we just don't know that until they actually come back and we see them in the stream and we can count them. You know, that's a measure of how good we're doing. And yeah, some streams aren't doing so well, and some streams are still cut off by roadways, culverts that are failing, both state, county, private culverts. It's spread out. It's not one entity that is failing altogether, but when we do fixes like this that took, you know, multiple agency cooperation with, that makes a huge difference for not only people, but for the resource as well. So again, hoping that once we get this whole watershed, all the pieces fitting together just right for access to these coveted spawning grounds upstream, the production on some of these systems will be tremendous.
There's increasing focus on salmon recovery in all habitats. For instance, juvenile salmon rely heavily on estuaries and shallow marine areas to grow and survive in their migration to the ocean. Places like Big Beef Creek, which has recently been preserved, have plenty of room for improvement.
We are standing on the shoreline of the Big Beef Shoreline Preserve. So this is the mouth of the Big Beef Creek meets the Hood Canal. This is a new property recently acquired by Great Peninsula Conservancy with the Hood Canal Coordinating Council. This property is going to be restored to natural setting to improve salmon habitat along the Hood Canal shoreline. Our property here has 10 acres of estuary shoreline, so all of this tide land right here behind me. And that area is really important for eelgrass beds and juvenile salmon when they're needing to eat little bitty fish and crustaceans. And all of this shoreline provides native habitat where native plants will drop little insects and spiders for those salmon to eat when they're first coming out of the stream from Big Beef over there. We also have a very small part up on the uplands upstream. We have a 10-acre parcel up there of forest around Big Beef Creek. And these pieces added up with all the other efforts that all the other conservation groups are doing has protected 90% of this creek and will protect that journey of the salmon go on from their uplands all the way across the stream to the estuary and get them out to the Puget Sound in a good start.
The path forward includes some even bigger projects, including the granddaddy of them all on the Kitsap Peninsula at the mouth of Chico Creek. That's where the state is working on a project that will put in a 55 million plus 400-foot long bridge that will replace 2 aging culverts in the area and should further improve salmon runs here.
That's been a long time in coming, so it's going to happen. They have funds for it. It'll take some time, but once that is completed, that'll be a huge benefit to this whole watershed.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Tales of the Sound. We always appreciate your feedback. Please do drop me a line at josh.farley@kitsapsun.com. See you next time.